Welcome to Faith Works Live. Here's your host, Rebecca Haynie.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. This is Faith Works Live. Rebecca Haynie is my name. Thanks for joining the party. It's always a fun one. We get to talk about things that matter. And for us, that's our faith. And what does it look like to live out our faith in times of challenge, times of chaos, times when, maybe the whole world goes crazy or your plans for life get upended. What does this look like, Lord? Well, that's basically my prayer every single morning. Like, okay, Lord, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's your day and I'm living in it. So show me the way. I'm just going to take the next right step forward. That's about what I got. Then my feet hit the floor and it's all bets are off at that point. It's a daily adventure. But it's one of those things I think we do need to live intentionally as people of faith. But just in general, I see better outcomes from my friends that take an intentional approach to life. I appreciate a lot of these voices, whether they're coming from a Christian community or not, that say we need to be in charge of our lives. Basically, we need to take advantage of our own decision-making capacity rather than allowing life to happen to us. And I do think I'm seeing that a lot in the marriages around me. I'm seeing a lot of concerning trends of marriages that are dissolving, that are breaking apart, people deciding not even to get married or pushing marriage to later and later in life. And we've reached demographic levels of concern there. But don't take my word for it. Let's go to someone that has actually done some of the research on relationships, and he can tell us. We like to have facts about the feelings would be good. Dr. Scott Sibley is our illustrious guest today. He is an associate professor at Northern Illinois University in Human Development and Family Sciences. He's also a licensed marriage and family therapist, and you can find out more about his work at decidetocommit.com. That's decidetocommit.com. Dr. Sibley, or can I call you Scott?
Either way is just fine. Yeah.
It's good to have you with us.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here today. I'm really excited to have a chance to talk to you about marriage, divorce, just some of these recent trends that we're seeing.
Well, what's something that does this, first of all, I kind of laid that hopefully not too dire outlook. Is this something that you're seeing reflected in your research? It seems like we're seeing a lot more divorce and even trends where people have been married for a very long time and now they're getting divorced as well. I'd like to talk specifically about some of that during the course of our conversation. But as an overview, is that accurate? Are people getting divorced more now than they used to?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it can feel some way sometimes that we're seeing a real increase. We're actually the divorce has actually been on the decline since the 1980s, but we are, like you said, we are seeing an increase for some, and it's kind of fluctuated through COVID. We've seen an increase a little bit in gray divorce. In other words, older adults choosing to divorce. Grandparental divorce is something I've written about because it's something I've personally experienced in my own life with my parents divorcing and how that's impacted our children. My wife and I have been married now for 20 years. We have 4 kids, and when my parents went through a divorce, that was a tough time. So I in some ways, I think we're thinking, yes, there's an increase here because we might see friends, family, others that we know. But overall, nationally, statistically speaking, it's been on the decline since the 1980s. So some of the things that have been increasing, though, we've seen a real increase in like cohabitation. Cohabitation's been on the rise now for, I'd say 10, 15 years. That's definitely been a trend. The problem is, we overlook the families, the children that are often separated from parents in those type of situations where their parents never married.
Mm-hmm.
But they ended up getting separated, and that impacts a whole, thousands of children itself. Divorce can be really, really impactful, and it can definitely, speaking from experience with my own family, my wife's parents, same thing. So we both come from divorced homes. As a marriage and family therapist, I've seen it with numbers of clients I've worked with, students I work with at the university. I mean, it has a real impact. We have a lot of research about that tell us that it really has an impact early on in life and later in life. Throughout the lifespan, we know that it can be impactful on an individual and the decisions they make in their relationships.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of that impact, and maybe we can break it down in terms of age, if that's appropriate. I
Sure.
think that there's a lot of people that understand the pain of coming from a divorced home. In my own story, my parents stayed together when I was young and when they were raising the kids, and then basically right after I became an adult, that's when they made the decision to divorce, and it wasn't a surprise at that point, and I understood. But at the same time, I noticed myself just even as a young adult, I was in college at the time, and that had a huge impact on me and on my decision making. You don't always realize that that could be going on in the background and that that's having the influence that it does. But it was a pivotal time for me. It was really sad, and it was really heartbreaking for me and for my siblings. So that's just making it personal. But I wonder, research wise, from a broader view, could you talk a little bit about the impact of divorce and maybe from the difference between young kids and the impact there? Because I know a lot of research has been done on that. Clearly, there's concern there and an impact, and many parents are motivated to strengthen their marriages because of their kids. But probably people are less aware of the impact on adult children when their parents are divorced later in life. So I know that was a big, wide, sweeping question. So you pick up the ball and run with it, my friend.
Well, let me try to tackle those different areas about divorce. So let's start with children. I think that's a with young children when we talk about from the very beginning of life to up to age 18, we know, if we're following these children, we know that on average, compared to children that do not come from divorced homes, they score lower on a variety of emotional, behavioral, social, health, academic outcomes. In other words, when we compare children from intact families that come from married homes compared to children that come from divorced homes, they're scoring lower, academically. They're scoring lower emotionally, behaviorally, socially, and even health. We know that the children can struggle with physical and mental health issues. One of the great increases that we've seen, it's not just a COVID thing, we've seen a great increase. I think it has a lot to do with smartphones. It has a lot to do with our society and there's just lots of different factors, but we've seen a real spike for children when it comes to anxiety, depression, different things they're experiencing mentally. And then you add on to that, my parents are fighting with each other all the time, or they don't want to be with each other, or they're now getting divorced, or I don't like having to go to dad's house, or I don't want to be at mom's house, or I don't like having to share both parents, or I never see my dad anymore. Ever since my parents divorced, I don't see my dad anymore. I hear that from a number of my clients and students, is like the family, this rift happens, the divorce takes place, and it's just not the same anymore. I think a
Yeah.
lot of the young children that I've worked with over the years, they also report to me my relationship, and I hear this from older adults too. My relationship with my mom and my dad is just not the same
Mm.
anymore. There's some really good reasons a person should get divorced. Like if you're being abused, if you're in a really toxic situation where your children are being hurt or you're being hurt, those are very good reasons to get a divorce. Or if your partner is really addicted to drugs or alcohol, or like say they have an addiction that they just don't seem to care about, and it's just really harming you or your family, those could be good reasons. But do you know the grand majority of divorces in the United States aren't for any of those things? They're actually low conflict divorces. And that's really, really confusing. Going back to children, I didn't know that my mom and dad didn't want to be together anymore. I had no idea that my parents didn't want to be together anymore. And now they're divorced or they're getting divorced. And I think thing that really can shake a child's world, like I don't understand. And if they can't make it in their marriage, and we see this with emerging adults, so now we're tracking them, we can, whether they're children, we're talking about 18 to 29-year-olds, so this emerging adulthood range. Now I don't know if I believe in commitment anymore. I don't know if I believe in marriage anymore. I'm scared about relationships because if my parents can't make it, why do you think I can? And so when
Yes.
we track children across the spectrum, longitudinally, what we see is about if your parents get divorced, you're about twice as likely to get divorced yourself. We see the same thing for a grandparental divorce, and maybe not as high, but it certainly has an impact. And what we know about families is that patterns repeat themselves through the generations. For instance, if we come from a family tree where there's just lots of healthy relationships, and even though there's struggles and people all have their arguments and have their difficulties, if people still seem to hang together and forgive each other and love each other, that seems to spread through the generations. So too is divorce. A variety of things. We can see patterns in families. Alcohol, we see that repeating through the generations. Child sexual abuse, it repeats through the generations. But of all the things in social science literature, this is one of the most prominent findings we have. And that's saying something because, we research all sorts of things when it comes to the family, society, and different things. One of the most prominent findings is divorce repeating itself through the generations.
So and that's, I would say, quite concerning for someone that wants to have a healthy marriage. So if you're an adult, you've met the love of your life, and you say, we're going to say, I do, we're going to take a chance on this. Cause like you mentioned, I know just anecdotally, there are an awful lot of people in my age group, from my college classes that decided they were disillusioned with marriage. They weren't even going to bother about it anyway. And they were going to live life on their terms. And I am convinced that most of them either changed their minds or are not very happy with some of those life decisions right now. Like, check in with them in about 10 years and we'll just see how all of that plays out. Free to live your life, but I'm just saying I'm happy with my choices. I do see that struggle, right? To say that I thought I knew what marriage was, or I had an unhealthy picture of marriage. Maybe from one of the situations that you mentioned, my parents couldn't make it, or now my grandparents didn't make it. So how do I stop that cycle? How do I do things differently with my husband, with my wife? And I think you have some of the answers that decide to commit, maybe just in the name, is that these are decisions that we can make, even though those patterns are easily repeated, that maybe we can be the one to break those chains, to break that cycle. But we just have to be really intentional about it.
Boy, I agree. Such great thoughts there. Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. This is, we are speaking my language right now. When I think about these things, it's all coming back down to decisions. Sometimes I have people say to me, I have commitment issues. When I hear somebody say I have commitment issues, the way it translates in my mind is I have decision-making issues. And love and commitment are actually not that complex of ideas or things to do. It's literally choosing to give up other choices. It's making a decision to let go of some alternatives. We live in a world where if we want to, we can get on our phones, we can swipe left and right all day long, trying to look for love, trying to look for happiness, always imagining that somehow, some way there's a better option out there for us. But sometimes the very best thing we can do is just take good care of the decision that we've made. I love this quote, and it's on my blog. It's choose your love, love your choice. There's something to be said for when we make a decision, we stick to it. Again, like I talked about before, there'll be times where it would not be the right decision to stay in an unhealthy relationship where it's really harming you or your children. But in so many cases, what I hear from couples is, we've fallen out of love. When I hear somebody say that, it's like they're taking their fingernails and they're like scraping them across the chalkboard.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's not the way this works. That's not the way life works. You've chosen to stop loving each other, and children can pick up on that very quickly. I think that's one of the reasons why a really unhealthy, conflictual marriage can actually be really traumatic for children, and it can be for adults too, to just be staying in there. A colleague of mine, a very well-respected researcher at the University of Chicago, Dr. Linda Waite, she has done lots and lots of research about marriages and divorces. And one of the really profound findings they had from a study some years ago is they're trying to figure out what happens after people make that decision to divorce. Are they going to be happier than they were before? And well, they took this big sample. They had 5,000 participants, and they whittled it down to 645 people that were unhappily married. And some of those people decided to go on and had to get a divorce, and then others decided to stay married. For those that stayed married, 2/3 of those had improved their marriage 5 years after the study was over. Like they were happier. They're glad they stuck it out.
Wow.
And for those that decided to get divorced, they didn't report being any happier than they were before. I think sometimes we say to ourselves, well, if I get divorced, this is going to fix all my problems. Well, what you don't realize and what you can't see is all the new problems that get divorced creates. And one of the big problems, and this is a worry I have for a lot of families, is that it really hurts their finances and their ability to succeed financially. We know that you're much more likely, especially women, much more likely to live in poverty. You know, if you go down that road. Again, there'll be times where it's totally the right decision, but I think sometimes we just bail out when what we need to do is just to stick with it. You know, I think one of the frustrating things sometimes for a lot of the women I'll work with that really want to save their marriage is their partner won't come to therapy. Like
yeah, that's really tough.
Really want my husband to come. I really want my partner to come so that we can improve this. And sometimes it could be vice versa. But I see a lot of women wanting to do something to save it. You know, the grand majority of all divorces in the United States are actually initiated by women. So yes, interesting things.
It is. And interesting, too, to say women are usually the ones that, well, maybe I should ask. I shouldn't presume. I have the impression that women are the ones that tend to want to do more to fix a relationship and say, okay, maybe they're the first to sound the alarm bell and say something's not working here. And guys are like, what do you mean? Everything's working for me. Or I'm busy, you know, and I'm trying to do life over here, trying to work hard, trying to do, you know, what I'm about. And I thought things were working okay. But you mentioned that by the numbers or by what you're hearing that there's some reticence for guys to go to therapy. Is that a deal breaker? So if you think you're having trouble with your marriage and you know, let's say you're the wife and you're talking about it with your husband and he says no, so what would be the next step then for that marriage, for that couple to continue working intentionally on their marriage if he's just put his foot down and said
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. Dr. Bill Doherty, he's at the University of Minnesota. Again, a good friend, colleague. One of the things that he's worked on in recent years is this idea of discernment counseling. In other words, is there a way for us to figure out between the two of you if you really want to save this marriage or not? Can we figure out a plan here? And this is even before therapy occurs. Can we just decide together what you really want out of this relationship? A lot of men actually will report that they want to stay in the marriage, but they don't feel like they're the problem in the marriage, or they feel like the marriage is just fine and they don't need to go to therapy. I think therapy is a tough thing for a lot of people, even though I think the taboo and I think the stigma is really reduced in recent years. You're putting yourself in a vulnerable position, sharing your life with somebody and sharing the difficult things they're going through it. And I think for a lot of people, they just want to, I'll just figure this out on my own. When in reality, sometimes it's going to be just too complex and complicated. You have like years of history here where this is not just the first moment in time we've been unhappy. You know, we have a whole series of events that have led to this moment in time. And so I think the thing I'd say in that situation is really, really asking your partner what they want. You know, if you want to stay in this marriage, we're going to need to get some help. You know, just like if your leg was broken, most people understand I probably should go see the doctor. I should probably go see the doctor. My leg is broken.
Yep, that one's going to leave a mark. Can't fix that one myself.
We don't always go running when, you know, our emotions are broken or our relationship is broken. We might say to ourselves, "Oh, I could just fix that all by myself." Well, it really, really can help and create real healing and real repair when you have a third party there that's caring about both sides and isn't biased, but really wants to just help both of you get to a better place. And I think, and this is something I talk about all the time in therapy, is I have couples and families, and I was just on the phone literally just a couple of days ago with a couple that was reaching out to me and saying, "Can we please meet for therapy, and you can already hear the finger pointing on the phone. I
Mm.
haven't met with them yet. I could already hear them pointing fingers. It's like, it's your fault we're having problems here. But the very best thing you can do actually for your marriage, for your family, is actually to point your finger back at yourself.
Mm.
Well, what can I do?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's something I could do to be a better husband, a better father. I have to think to myself about that all the time. Because I teach about these things every day, it's like in front of my face all the
Sure.
time. Like, there's lots of ways I know I can improve and grow as a father and as a husband, but helping people get to that place is not always easy to actually admit, you know what, I could probably do better here. And if you've been hurt, in a variety of ways, let's say your partner's cheated on you, they've gone outside of the marriage and they've hurt you in that way. You might say to yourself, it's all their fault that this is happening. And in so many ways, they've done something they never should have done. They violated your trust, they've hurt you. I'm not saying what they did was justified, but there's a dynamic that's going on between the two of you that allowed this person to feel justified or feel like what they're doing was okay or they should do it. And
Mm.
yeah, people don't just do things. I really believe that people have motives to why they do what they do. And
Mhm.
it could just be feeling like, I'm not getting enough love or enough attention. We're not having enough sex in this marriage. We're not spending the time like we used to. And so to be able to feel better, I'm going to kind of look outside of it. And worked with way too many couples to see how that can end sometimes. It's not to say we have lots of, if everybody that had infidelity in their marriage divorced, we'd have a lot more divorces in the
Mm.
United States. A lot of people are able to work through that. It's not to say it's an easy thing to work through, but you might need a therapist. You might need some real help. It's like surgery that you're going to need on your relationship. But again, the majority of divorces are not for infidelity. They're not for drug or alcohol use. They're not for these really terrible, awful things that could be happening. It's usually just low conflict.
Mm.
Like, we've
And
fallen out of love. We just don't spend time anymore. We don't communicate anymore. You're so busy with your work, etc.
and that's navigable. Like that we can fix. We can work on that. If you made the decision to get married, you can make the decision to save your marriage in like 99% of cases. At least that's my point of view. Of course, you're the doctor and I'm not. But Dr. Scott Sibley is our guest today. We're talking about marriage and divorce, the impact of divorce, and what you can do to strengthen your marriage. He laid about 56 different great points that we could chase down for another. Each one is probably going to be its own conversation. That, like, recovering from infidelity alone, that needs its whole hour. So maybe we can book you again for a repeat on that one.
Sure.
Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more with Scott about the impact of divorce. You mentioned gray divorce, which is this trend of people getting divorced later in life. And I feel like that's just exploding in my generation, but that's my perception, and he has the numbers. So we'll talk a little bit more about why that might be, some of the impacts on families and on society, and again, what we can do to strengthen our marriage, to decide to commit. Check out more about his work at decidetocommit.com. We'll be right back. This is Faith Works Live. You know how much we love Anonymous beef at the Haynie house. It is delicious. It's wonderful quality. It's naturally raised with no steroids, antibiotics, and they just do what they do so well. High quality beef at the Anonymous farm. But did you know you can actually see where your beef comes from? You can visit Anonymous Farm. The fine folks, Dave and Mary Lynn, are the most hospitable folks I may have ever met. They'll let you feed a bottle calf and then meet the cows at Anonymous Farm. And opening soon is a special treat, Mulberry Cottage, for a stay at the Anonymous Farm. It's a family-oriented getaway, and they'll let you hike the trails out there. You can forage or bird watch or just enjoy the beautiful sunset from their porch. I'm very excited to check it out myself, and they'll even let you do a cookout with Anonymous beef. Order your beef or your next vacation at anonymousbeef.com. That's OHNEMUS beef.com. In today's world, security has never been more vital. And at FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with VeriGuard Security. It's a professional physical security service, and they're really raising the bar in security and private investigations. Whether you need a team of professional officers to protect what you have worked hard to build, or their mobile security units for multiple properties or large locations, from business or corporate properties to your home or neighborhood. Perhaps you've got an event coming up. They secure quality security coverage for events large and small, because it's about peace of mind and protecting you, your family, your team, and your property. Settle for nothing less than the best when it comes to your security. You shouldn't have to compromise. When it comes to security, you can trust VeriGuard. Contact them today at veriguard.us. That's VARA guard.us. For security service you can trust VeriGuard. So glad you're with us. It's FaithWorks Live. We're talking about marriage and relationships today, and as well as divorce, some of that disillusion, the trends that we're seeing in society about marriages that aren't working, fewer people even getting married, so we're not even making it to the starting line in my generation, and then the one just after me. But millennials got a lot of problems. So, and we're great about blaming somebody else. It's never really our fault. So we've got that going for us. But I think Dr. Scott Sibley being our excellent guest today, and he's a researcher. He is a marriage and family therapist. He's an associate professor at Northern Illinois University in their Human Development and Family Sciences department. So he knows whereof he speaks. And he gets to counsel couples. He gets to talk with them about strengthening their marriage, working through some of those, pretty typical problems, I would think, and probably some more extreme situations too. But Scott, I'm thinking specifically about this trend, at least it looks like a trend to me. And anecdotally, I'm seeing it more and more of couples that have been married for, 30, 40 years. They've raised their kids together. They've been through joy and pain together. They've been through trials, sickness and in health, richer and poorer. And then, Bill and Melinda Gates, for example, really your prime example of this. Now, all of a sudden, they're deciding to call it quits, to split. And that's usually shocking for the people around them, thinking you've made it this far. Why is it suddenly you're deciding that this marriage no longer works for you? And like you said, I'm sure there's lots of different reasons that people do get divorced. There can be long-standing problems that nobody knew about. But what are you seeing from your research and your practice about this increase in gray divorce?
Well, one of the things that we know of in families and in marriages is there's moments in time where there could be some upheaval and difficulty, and those are through transitions. Anytime a transition happens in the family life course, that can be tough. For instance, when you get married and you have your first child, unless you are united together with your partner and we're making a decision together to be united and parent, that could be a tough transition. So too can the transition to be like all the children are leaving the house. We're empty nesters now. And so getting a gray divorce, that's another transition that's happening in the life course. We face these transitions throughout time. And, if you're in your 50s or your 60s or 70s, you might say to yourself, well, am I really satisfied with the life that I have now? Is this really where I want to go? Is this the person I really want to be with? He's so grumpy every day. Do I really want to be with this grumpy guy every day? I don't know. If I really do, I don't know if we still see eye to eye. We just don't have that spark like we used to. One of my favorite things to talk to these older couples about is just, can you tell me about what marriage was like when you were happier? And can you tell me about what brought you together in the first place? I used to ask my parents that, and it was very, very difficult for them to even remember, why did we get married? I don't know. If you can help couples start seeing some of those things, I think it can start mending some of the problems. One of the things we know about marriage that can be very, very helpful is if you are really close friends with your partner. Now imagine, all the kids have now left the house and you're just left with your spouse. You might be still trudging along through your careers. I don't know. You're in different places depending on where you're at in that life cycle. But if you don't feel closer connected, if you're just sitting there on your phone every night and your partner's, sitting on their phone, and you're just not really talking to each other, where's the friendship? Where's the excitement? Where's the, passion at? It's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that you have to continually do, and it requires effort, is to continue to cultivate that love, that friendship with each other. Now, one of the trends, and you're right, that we've seen in recent years, and especially we saw this 2018, 2019, 2020, especially headed into COVID, we were seeing an increase of gray divorce. And some of the times where during the year where this really spikes, and this is really sad to say, but it really spikes sometimes around the Thanksgiving time, the Christmas time. It's like, I have these expectations for what our family is going to be like, and you were just a jerk at our Thanksgiving. You were just awful during Christmas. How could you treat our grandkids that way? Or why don't you want to be with our grandchildren? Or why aren't you talking to our children? I mean, there's just a variety of reasons why this might happen in the older years. But I often talk to couples that are later in life, and I say, well, what type of legacy do you want to really leave for these kids and grandkids? Is this really what you want to do at the end of your life, is just kind of blow everything up and start over? And sometimes that might be the right decision. Again, if you're being abused, if you're being hurt in a terrible way. But in so many cases, it's just something that could be resolved if you really were united together as a couple and wanted to work through it. I wrote about this for the Institute for Family Studies a few years ago, and it really resonated, I think, with a lot of people, because I was talking about my own personal experience, what it's like for my kids, for myself. It was one of the hardest times I've been through in my entire life. So my parents, they signed their divorce documents, like they finalized the divorce on their 39th wedding anniversary. Why it had to be on their wedding anniversary, I don't know.
Wow.
But that was the day it was finalized. And, so I'm talking about families every day. And I remember the day my mom decided to leave my dad, she called me up. I was about to teach a child abuse and neglect class over at the university. And she said, Scott, I'm going to be leaving your dad today. I'm going to divorce your dad, and you better not tell him. He's on a business trip at the time. And she says, if you tell him, there'll be hell to pay. And I had been really close to my mom leading up to that point in time. And then my mom kind of cut me off for 6 months, just didn't talk to me. No texting, no emails, she just kind of like blocked me from any communication. And it really just severed relationships. Like my brother and sister and I, we haven't even talked for about 8 years. I know that's really painful to say. And as somebody that studies families, it's just awful to say that. And my relationship with my parents, it just hasn't been the same. Even though I still talk to them, I still love them. They're still my mom and my dad. It's just not like what it used to be. I mean, all the Christmases, all the 4th of Julys, all these times we had together, it's just gone. It's not to say that we still don't do fun things with them individually from time to time, but those family get-togethers, they're gone. And so one of the quotes, and maybe I could just read this to you. This is from my blog post at the Institute for Family Studies. And it's on my blog, on my website. Again, I publish it there, and on the Institute for Family Studies on my blog, I said, well, we may be finally seeing a decrease in gray divorce. And that's one of the trends I wanted to say is we've been seeing kind of an increase, and then we've seen some decrease. So while we may be finally seeing a decrease in gray divorce, I think the mistaken assumption often by parents in their 50s, 60s, and 70s is now that their children are grown and have left the nest, divorce simply won't be as hurtful or disruptive. Having experienced this myself, I encourage older couples considering divorce to slow down, seek therapy, and consider the long-term consequences to their adult children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. The greatest gift parents can give their children, their grandchildren, is a loving, committed marriage. When they see that loving and committed marriage, I have a lot of students will say, I come from a divorced home, but my grandparents, they're just rock stars when it came to marriage or their relationship. I could just count on grandma and grandpa. They had it together. And that's what I want in my marriage. And so I think if you're seeing that from the grandparents, I think for some, it kind of gives a pause like, oh my gosh, now divorce has kind of entered the equation for our family. and this could be a possibility. If you're coming from that situation, and maybe some of your listeners are coming from that situation, you and I, we talked about this. We both come from divorce homes. One of the things that you can do, though, for your children is to reassure them about your own marriage, your own personal commitment to your mother and father. I remember having this conversation. We were in the van driving along, and our 4 children had just learned this news, and they were all just in tears. And I was in tears, and I was just saying, well, one of the things I just want to reassure you is your mom and I we're staying together. Dang it. We're going to be resilient. And again, if you remember, I talked about that statistic. If your parents get divorced, you're twice as likely to you're divorced yourself. Well, that's just on average, and that's a statistic, but that doesn't speak to the thousands and thousands of couples out there that come from divorce homes. But guess what? They're crushing it in their marriage. They're just making it work every day. They're just doing really, really great in their own marriage. And I think, and that I've written about that. I'm going to be presenting about that later this year, this idea of resilient commitment. In other words, even though I experience this instability, even though I've experienced tough relationships, I can still be resilient. I can still believe in commitment and love again. I can still believe in these things. And what it requires is 2 partners that really want to make it work. And so, if you have that conversation, if grandparents divorce, talk to the kids. Don't just get all consumed in your own emotions. You've got to pull the family together and say, you know what? Grandma and grandpa might have made this decision, but it doesn't mean we have to do it as in our family. And in their own marriages, they can choose to be resilient as well.
That's such a key word. Is such a key I would say virtue. It's a virtue that I think we are rediscovering, is the idea of resilience, the idea of committing to something bigger than yourself, whether that's your marriage or your family. Obviously from a faith-filled perspective, there's a whole lot of other vested interests, like your whole faith community, your church family should be there to help support your preacher, should be able to help offer counsel and guidance and bring you back to a God that talks about selfless love and that shows what self-sacrifice looks like. And you've got all of these people that are invested in creating healthy marriages, healthy families, and providing that community to help you up when you're having those hard times. So you've got a whole support network where it doesn't feel like you're all alone, or that if you're off, thinking that reality can get a little warped when you start isolating. You're just like, is it just me? Am I the only one? Talk it out with somebody. I mean, that's definitely, and I'm sure a licensed therapist would be a great resource as well, as a part of that, because I don't think anybody gets all better all by themselves, like you were talking about there. We need somebody else to bring us back to true north. We need that outside perspective that can help us to reshape and to challenge our thinking sometimes. Because I don't know about you, but I think all my ideas are great, but the majority of them need a little bit of feedback. I'll just put it that way. Need a little bit of product beta testing, and sometimes they just need to go in the trash can over there, but that's why I have more. And I think when it comes to marriage, if we are continually growing together and we recognize again every single day that we're deciding to put that other person first, to take account of their needs and put them ahead of our own, it's kind of that, if JFK wouldn't mind a small tweak, it's ask not what your marriage can do for you, but what you can do for your marriage. That you're in this thing, and that it is a daily choice, and that someday you're going to look across the bedroom or the kitchen and be like, why are you so grumpy? Man, I don't even why? What are we even doing here? But whether we have to recall yet again that we are committed to something bigger than ourselves, that we're committed to the unit, to that person that we are deciding to love day by day. They're going to change. You're going to change. None of us are what we used to be at 21, for good reason. And that can be a very positive and very beautiful thing, but I don't know that we take that into account. As you mentioned, Scott, that we're looking at long term, and we're making lifelong commitments when we say I do, and then when life happens and things change, we're surprised by that, and we think, well, maybe we made the wrong decision. Now, you mentioned some practical help. I think this is an area that I have particular interest in, because if you're coming from a divorced family, you have maybe that statistical increase, but if you're one of those those that's standing beside like myself and my husband, we're saying it doesn't matter about the background. We're going to fight against the odds, and we're going to have a healthy family, and we're going to have a rock solid, awesome, adventure of a marriage, because we got this one life, and God's given us the two of us, and we're going to rock this thing. Dang it. And so what are some practical steps that people can put in place in their marriage, regardless of background, but the people that especially are being intentional about this, that we can do to help either divorce proof, maybe that's I've heard that term before. I don't know if it's copyrighted or not, but we can start building into our marriage. We can start making it the best possible marriage.
I talked to you about this earlier before I think we started this conversation, but my good friend and colleague, Dr. Scott Stanley, University of Denver, he has this idea of sliding versus deciding. It comes from lots of research that they've had over the years. And what they find is when a couple is entering a transition, whatever it could be, let's say we move to a new town, or let's say that we get a new job, or we have a child, or all of our children are growing up and they're all leaving the home. As we're facing these transitions, some couples, they just kind of slide through them. They just kind of let life happen to them. They don't really talk about it. With my undergraduates, we talk about this all the time. It's like, why would you just move in with this person? You hardly even knew them. Why would you have sex with them, et cetera? But in marriages, we can slide too. If we're not careful, we could just kind of slide through the transitions that are happening to us instead of actually talking to each other. And so one of the things I talk to couples about all the time is, when's the last time that you just spent one-on-one time together? So every day you've got to make that time together. And I think sometimes we think to ourselves, oh man, I have this wonderful smartphone and I can talk to people and text with them, etc. There's something to be said for just putting the phone down and just looking your partner in the eyes and said, how was your day today? How are you doing? I sure love you. I appreciate you. Thanks for all that you do for our family, for our children. Thanks for being such a good support to me. I think expressing gratitude, is another thing, that you're doing all that you can to express gratitude in your marriage, that your partner's never wondering if you're thankful. They just know it because you're saying it. And so we express love verbally. And I know for some of our homes, we did not hear that. Like, we did not hear the words, I love you, or that really might seem foreign to us. But this reassurance that we can provide to our partner, to our children, it goes a long, long way. We know this from even youth that are experiencing mental health issues or a variety of things. When we experience reassurance, it's like a stabilizing force in our lives. And so that lots of marriages, they just need that reassurance that we're still in this together, we're united, we want to make this work. You make time for fun together, as a family, as a couple. You do fun things together. You do exciting things. I think lots of us, we could just start going through the motions when it comes to sex, because sex is like a chore now. It's not exciting anymore. Or, we used to have this big spark or romance in our, one of the things that's going to lead to the spark and the romance is just doing new and fun things together. Things you weren't doing before, even just taking a walk after dinner and holding hands. That can go a long way to how close and you feel towards each other. It goes both ways. You might say to yourself, well, I'm just not receiving enough intimacy in this relationship. But it could be that your partner just needs you to give them more attention. You just need to talk to them more. You need to appreciate them more. You need to be more kind to them, more patient, more understanding. But marriages can really flourish. Marriages can really succeed. One of the things I actually was just teaching students. I'm teaching a class this summer, and I was just teaching them about divorce and marriage. And one of the cool findings we had, and this is from a recent research study, and it comes from two of the top scholars in the field. And what they found is when they're able to track couples longitudinally, in other words, throughout time, what they found was that over half of all first marriages, they actually last a lifetime. Now, we might say to ourselves, oh man, half of all marriages end in divorce. Well, that's not even a correct statistic, because it's about 42%. But then if you have protective factors in your life, like even getting a college education can be a protective factor. Going to premarital counseling could be a protective factor. maybe even listening to this show today. I don't know. It could be a protective
Hey,
factor.
now, I'd love that.
But the outlook for marriage is really a lot more upbeat than people seem to understand, because there used to be this finding, and it was widely talked about in our field of research with marriage and families, that marriages seem to decline over time. Like the children came into the equation and the stress of life, and it just had a tendency of just kind of decreasing in satisfaction and happiness over time. That's actually not what we find. It actually has a tendency of increasing for a lot of couples over time. It's not to say all couples, but for a lot of couples it does. And think about that. About half of all marriages last a lifetime. That should be happy and wonderful news to hear. And again, we're talking about divorce today, but there's a lot of couples out there that are going to make it. I truly believe that our communities, our neighborhoods, our family, our friends, it's like we can be, we can get each other sick, things can spread. But the thing that's a good thing to spread is healthy, happy relationships. I think that's contagious. And then you might feel like, wow, everybody is divorcing around me. I think in some ways that can feel a bit contagious too, because we just start thinking, well, if they're getting a divorce, what's wrong with our marriage? Are we going to get a divorce too? Well, I think a great thing to do is look for all the good that you can find. Are there some good marriages that you know of? Because I know for a lot of the people they've experienced a lot of heartache and a lot of hurt. If they come from a divorce home, I've even heard people say to me, well, I don't know of any good, happy marriages. I've never seen one. They're out there. They're definitely out there. But I appreciate that a lot of the recent research we've had, though, has been looking longitudinally, because when we just look at a certain time point, that doesn't always provide to us the best window or perspective on what marriage really provides over a lifespan.
Absolutely. It's like looking at a still frame instead of the whole movie. And that's one of those things that we, as creatures that are sort of bound by time and yet confused by time at the same time, and it's from my perspective, because we're immortal. We were never designed to be just here and now. We always have this forward thinking, this idea of hope that things can get better. And I think that we have to live life, including married life, in anticipation of that. And I love what you were talking about, that even if this is a hard season and we all go through struggles, like the most intense pain and the most intense joy that you can have is going to be with your family. It's going to be with your marriage, with your kids. And if you're in that hard time right now, I mean, I don't want it to sound too cliche, but if you can hang on, you could be right on the precipice. You could be going through the fire to get to that jewel at the end, that treasure, so that you can, you don't know what's going to await you in that next chapter. If you can just get past this hard time, and you don't have to do it alone. And that's the thing. It's not like you're saying just tie a knot and hang on, for dear life, but you invite another voice, a supportive voice, to come in, whether that's your mom or your grandma, maybe who have been through this and wound up happier on the other side, whether that's someone, your preacher, your pastor, someone from your church that can speak life into this. And I think guys communicating with other guys too, who have been down that road, especially those voices, that's an iron sharpening iron conversation is what I call that. And I think that's so critical that we're talking about this, because it matters, because it's worth it. It's not one of those things you can put on autopilot or distract away and be like, oh, I spent more time looking at my smartphone than I did at my wife or my husband today. That's a problem. And that's probably, again, a whole other conversation. But if that distraction is taking you away from your marriage, if you're not moving toward one another because of it, then put a limitation on that. Maybe you put your phone, we have a little wooden chest that we put all our phones in for all the kids, like for dinner time until dinner's over. And I was unpopular for that decision, but that's how we're going to do it at our house. And sometimes I have to just put it right in there along with the kids, because I need to set that limitation on myself. I need to actually be present with my husband and with my kiddos. And that's important to us. It's difficult, and maybe that's one of the times that, like, it might be different distractions for different generations of people. That's the particular distraction we're dealing with, along with everything else we can access through that smartphone, all of that can be detrimental to our marriage. So we put guards up on that. We put safeguards, and guardrails around that so that because we're in charge of the future of our family, we're in charge of the legacy that we leave. And these are decisions that we're making, that even if there's bad examples around there of disillusions of marriage, that we've made a commitment and that we're going to fulfill that for ourselves, for our kids, for our legacy, for, God willing, our grandkids, and for the rest of the wider world. That if, just like you're saying, it doesn't just have to be part of swimming in the culture that we're all living in. You have control of your life. You have the decision-making power about what you're going to be, what you're going to stand for, what you're willing to commit to. And if you make that promise and you make that commitment, then it's up to you to fulfill it, like you said. And for us, that's a come what may. That is absolute 100%. And it's a decision every single day. Some days are harder than others. But it's signing up for an adventure every single day with your favorite person in the world. And you get to turn to them and say, no matter what, I'm going to stay. No matter what, I'm going to grow with you. And I'm going to, be able to lean on you and be strong for you and all of those things. That's the type of resilience that I think you mentioned. Absolute great word. And Dr. Scott Sibley, it has been my joy to learn from you and to be encouraged by you. Any last thoughts as we wrap up our talk today?
Just the final thing I'd say is, please just know that it's normal to have fluctuations in your relationship. There will be times where things are happier than other times. But one of the great things, to me, one of the purposes of this life, I know this is a faith-based program. I think one of the things I think back to my marriage of 20 years is we sure have grown together and been closer to each other when we've been able to successfully navigate trials and adversity that we've experienced. And you might be experiencing trials and adversity right now in your marriage, and you might be feeling like this is the end. I just don't know if we're going to be able to get through this together. But there's something to be said for hanging on and something to be said for fighting for your marriage instead of just throwing in the towel, actually doing something that's going to have an impact on future generations. What a great gift you could give to your children, to grandchildren, to know that mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, they made it. And that must mean that I have a chance to make it too. We know that's very, very impactful for young adults, for emerging adults, when they can see that really has an impact on their ability to succeed in their own romantic relationships.
Dr. Scott
It's wonderful
Sibley.
to be here today. Thank you.
Dr. Scott Sibley. Oh, anytime. Well, if you answer my call once, you're always on my list. So thank you for talking with us, for sharing your insights, your research today, and for encouraging us with tools to help strengthen our marriage. Check out decidetocommit.com for more on Dr. Sibley's research. And they cover all kinds of things. They're covering ways to be intentional in your relationships, how to spice up your romance, your romantic life, whether you're I'm seeing things on overcoming challenges specific to interracial relationships or going through those transitions in life. So all kinds of great stuff. We'll link to it in the notes in our podcast as well. And thanks so much for listening. We couldn't have done it without you, for real. Rebecca Haynie here. I've learned a lot that I can take. I love taking notes. If there's one thing as a book nerd, I love a homework assignment. So I'm going to learn to apply some of these strategies, that intention, that gratitude in my marriage. I'm a word person, so I love to verbalize. So for me, it's great to have another excuse to talk to my husband. I'm not sure if he sees it the same way, but I can report back. But to be able to verbalize that thought, to look for the good. I mean, there's so much in this world that tends to distract us and pull us towards negativity. Why don't we be our number one encourager for our husband or our wife, our number one encourager, and say, it doesn't matter what the rest of the world is doing right now. Here, we're going to be a place of hope. We're going to be a place that sees what is good and true and noble and lovely. And we call that out in one another. And that is our own little haven. Like we can create that in this world. That would be a beautiful life. That is a life worth pursuing. So thank you for calling us to that, Dr. Sibley, today. And until next time, we have a mission. Let's be about it. That mission is to love God, to serve others, and to live free. Thanks for listening to FaithWorks Live. When a woman faces an unplanned pregnancy, every possible emotion goes through her head. Where can she go for help and for hope? She can go to Intervisions. Here in our metro, we have 2 healthcare clinics where she will find hope and help.
From free pregnancy testing and STD testing to free ultrasounds, InnerVision serves women and men with STDs who find themselves in vulnerable situations. They're completely free of charge because of generous donations from folks like you. And their medical clinics help their patients get all the information that they deserve that empowers them to make life-affirming decisions. That's what they do at InnerVision's healthcare clinics right here in Des Moines. Learn more at innervisionshealthcare.org. That's innervisionshealthcare.org. And you can call 24 hours a day at 515-440-CARE. That's 515-440-2273. There's no better time than now to stand for life, and you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest-standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they're dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House, they educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org.